Well, hello, everyone. So you guys having a good day so far? All right. So hopefully you haven't too much sugar in you from your ice cream break, so at least you can last before you crash. So my name is Christine Abernathy, and I am on the developer advocacy team here at Parse, and I'm here to lay some more Parse goodness your way. So last week, I was actually at a Unity game developers conference, and I was talking to a potential developer who had thought about using Parse, and he said, oh, but you guys didn't do this. I said, but we do that. But you don't do this. I said, we do that. And I was like, at the end, he was like, I wish I had known that. So what I'm here to do is just to make sure that you all know what other things that you can do with Parse, what's available to you. So obviously, I don't want you to be done with your app, sitting at the beach somewhere drinking margaritas and wondering, did my app do everything it should have done? Have I optimized it enough? Have I made my users use all of the things that it could do? Basically, is my app doing all it can be? Well, Cloud Code can help you with a lot of things that can help sort of augment the mobile app that you have now and take it to the next level. So Cloud Code will help you answer these questions. And basically, all it is if you want more complexity in your app that you currently have, Cloud Code can take it to the next level. And simply put, Cloud Code is code that runs on Parse Cloud. It's built using the JavaScript SDK. So it puts at your fingertips all of the same APIs that are available for those who are creating web apps. So how many of you developers out here already have Parse where you're using web application, like you created web applications with Parse? So we've got a few people in the room. So basically, if you're creating code using Cloud Code, you're doing much of the same thing. So let's see some of the use cases that you can use with Cloud Code. So you could be sending way more data down to your app than you're comfortable with. As an example, say you have a movie app, and you're storing all kinds of Parse objects. You've got movies, you've got actors, you've got reviews, and you want to show users a movie's review rating. So you're sending a lot of data down just to do one small thing, and you can certainly send all of this data down to your client, do the computation logic down on your client, or you can use Cloud Code to do that. So instead of doing it on the mobile device, you run all the code up on the servers and send only the data that you need. In a way, your user's data plan is happy. Maybe the carrier is not so, but everybody is a lot happier with using a lot less data. So you're limiting the data that you send down to the device, and your app's perceived performance could also be a lot better. There are also use cases where you want to process the data before you save it up on Parse Cloud. Some of the scenarios where this includes are if you want to, say, check or validate the data before you send it out. You can think of this as server-side validation. And you can certainly do the validation down on your client device on, say, your iOS. But if you're doing it on the server side, then you're taking advantage of having sort of like, whether it's an iOS and Android app, across the platform, you are running a consistent experience. So that's one of the reasons why you want to do Cloud Code or do server validation using Parse Cloud Code. Another scenario, maybe you want to normalize the data or sanitize the data before you save it. Again, you can do this on Cloud Code instead of having the logic on your client device. There also may be scenarios where you want to bypass data access control layers. Now, what is that? So Parse objects come with inbuilt security data model, which means that certain Parse objects may be, say, only read-only or read and modify to certain users, and you have the ability to set that yourself. But there could be cases where you want to change that. For example, say your app has, users can create recipes in your app, and the users that create those recipes, you want only those users to be able to change it. But one of the fields in that recipe object is a like, and other users, say, can like that content. So you want, in certain scenarios, a particular field to be modifiable. So how would you do that? You certainly don't want to do that on the client side. Again, Cloud Code can help you do that by bypassing the access control when you're writing data only if it's a like count. So in addition to saving objects or processing data before save it, there could be scenarios where you want to do something after you've saved an object. For example, you may want to send out a push notification, or you may want to modify certain other pieces of data. For example, you could have a movie object, and you could have a review object, two different objects. So movies have reviews. So as users are adding reviews, you may have a counter on your movie object that you want to increment when a review is added. The way you can do this is when a review object is saved, after it's saved, you want to increment a counter. And you can certainly do this with Cloud Code. So these are some of the scenarios that you can do using Cloud Code. Another use case is maybe you want to expand your app's mobile capabilities through integration with third-party APIs. And you can certainly do all this logic from your mobile device, make the API calls, process the data in your mobile device. But the advantage of having this logic on the server side using Parse Cloud Code is the same as if you had your own server. Well, certainly, if the third-party API changes, you're kind of stuck if you have a lot of that code inside of your mobile app. I should know, I have a news application in Apple, which is like gathering dust because the third-party API changed, and I didn't have Parse at the time. So you definitely want to do something like this. It makes your app a lot more flexible. So we're going to build a demo shortly. And again, using the Cloud Code, you can go ahead and run the code through Parse Cloud. And if you wanted to add any additional APIs, it's very easy to do so. Now, while it's easy to kind of live only in a mobile app and have only a mobile app, there could be scenarios where you might want to host a website. It could be just static content or dynamic content. Static content could be maybe I have an iOS app and I want to advertise that my app is available on the App Store, or if I have an Android app on Google Play. Or you may want to host a fully fledged dynamic website. And certainly, you can do this with Cloud Code through Parse hosting. And this will be covered in more detail in Brian's Advanced Cloud Code, which is right after this session in the next room. So if you want to learn more, go ahead and check that out. So we've talked about some of the use cases, and let's talk about more fun stuff for a developer. We're approaching live code minus, say, 4 slides. So how do you use Cloud Code? So you've learned that Cloud Code runs, well, in the cloud somewhere magical. Your typical workflow after initial setup is that you would actually write code, develop it on your local machine, and after you've developed it locally, you then deploy it up onto the Parse servers, and once it's available on the Parse servers, then it can be accessed by any mobile device. So Parse provides you with, first of all, command line tools that you can run on Mac, Windows, on Linux, and these command line tools then allow you to manage your cloud code and then deploy them. So let's go into a little bit more detail on what that means. The workflow that you will flow through is typically the first thing you want to do after you've installed the command line tools is to run a one-time setup to create a local cloud code directory. So it's a parse new and the name of your directory. And you do this one time for your app. Once you've set up with that, you're actually going to get a set of files that are set up inside of your local directory. And you can actually get up and going real fast because it comes pre-installed with a hello world, your typical hello world function. But usually, your workflow will be you make code changes. And by default, you're going to have a file called main.js under the cloud directory. And you can go ahead and make any changes you add, add cloud functions. And then when you're ready, deploy it up to the Parse cloud where your app is available. Then the next thing you want to do is actually test it. So you can test this if you are on Mac and Linux. You can run a curl command. And in the curl command, you're going to pass in certain parameters, such as your application ID, a key. And then you can pass in some parameters in there if you need them. And then the last line here, that endpoint, it corresponds to a cloud function. So hello corresponds to the hello world cloud sample. And if you need to make any tweaks, you go back, you make the code changes, deploy it once more, and then you run the code. When you're happy, you can go ahead and test it from your mobile device. If you need to debug or just know what's going on, we have also some available tools. You can debug from the console. So if you run parse log, this will show you your debug output. You can add the -f flag, for example, if you want to, say, get a tail F so you see what's going on running through. Or you can actually add things like, I just want to see the last n number of files. We also give you the capability, if you want to just see warnings or just debugs or errors, you're allowed to do that too. In addition to seeing your log files from the console, you can also go to the web console and go under the cloud code, under logs, and you'll see the log files there as well. So 2 easy ways to kind of look at what's going on inside of your app. So you've now been primed with all the tools that are available. So let's go ahead and talk about code. So cloud functions. So cloud functions, we talked about things like use cases like limiting the data that goes back into your mobile device. And cloud functions refers to the code that you write to implement these use cases. For example, in your movie app, you could route a cloud function that shows you the average rating of the movies. So this is what a cloud function will look like. A lot of JavaScript in there. So typically, we're going to go through an example of how we build a cloud function, but you would just, in the first line, parse.cloud define, and that's how you define a custom cloud function, and then your function name, and then the logic. So that's what a cloud function looks like. And typically, you would put the cloud function inside of the main.js file. The main.js file, as I said before, comes with a hello world sample. You just add onto that all of the cloud functions that you need. So let's go ahead and walk through some code and show you how it's easy to build a cloud function. So let's switch to the demo machine. All right, so what you have in front of you is the web console, and it's got my hello world sample, which has already been deployed there. You can see the files that you have. You can also see the logs that are available. And in here, I have opened up a terminal window. This is where I'm going to be deploying any of the changes that I made. And in here, this is my main.js file. So what are we going to do? So the demo we're going to do is build a cloud function, and we're going to build a function that does a couple of things. And number one, it's going to actually go and get a list of upcoming movies. Always going to talk about movies. Why waste a good theme? And then secondly, we're going to talk about searching for movies. And then we're going to see what this cloud function looks like. We're going to test it out locally, and then see it in an Apple, on iOS, and we're also going to look at it on Android. Rotten Tomatoes has APIs for developers that allows you to do what I'm trying to do here. So it's got an API for upcoming movies. Earlier I went and I registered for a developer account. I got some keys that will help me run these API calls. And here it is. There's an API handily there that's going to give me a list of upcoming movies, and they also give you examples of what the response looks like. So that's the first API we're going to call and turn this into a cloud function. So because I'm not that good at typing a lot of lines, I've actually cut and pasted a few things. So we're going to walk through. First thing I'm going to show you is I'm going to drop in a cloud function. And what this cloud function is I'm defining a custom cloud function. It's called movie upcoming list. It's just a name I made up. And the typical signature here, a function request and response. And then here, I'm making use of the API method, which allows me to make an HTTP request call. So parse.cloud.http request, which takes in a URL. And this is the same URL that's from the Rotten Tomatoes to give me a list of the upcoming movies. And then I'm passing in one of the parameters, which is the API key that I got from Rotten Tomatoes, and then some extra parameters to limit what I get returned back. And then when I get a successful response back, I'm just going to display the output. So that's my first test. So the next thing is I'm going to go ahead and save that. And in terminal, I'm just going to run parse deploy, because now I've changed my code. I want to upload it up to the parse servers. So I'm going to upload the files out there, and when it's done, I'm just going to go ahead and test it. And the way I'm going to test it is I'm going to run a curl command. And in the curl command, so let's go ahead and get this. I didn't get everything here. So I'm going to run a curl command, make a call, and I'm getting all this data back. It's just way too much data for me. So as I'm testing this, I'm like, let me just kind of limit the data I get back. So let me go ahead and see what I get back from here. I'm going to probably want to display the title. And let me choose to also show back, say, the audience score. So that's a piece of data that I'm going to choose to show or just to get in my particular app, just to show you just the flow that you would go through as, say, maybe as you're passing the data. So the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to make use of a few things. There is this cloud module called underscore, and we'll talk about cloud modules in a bit, but this is a really handy cloud module that allows you to parse data. So we're going to go ahead and use it to check out some data. I'm going to add a function that's going to be easy for me to get the data I want. So here I'm going to add a function, and the function I'm going to add is just going to be a representation of movie data. I'm just going to check for the title. I'm going to get something called the audience rating. And We're going to use this in a bit, and I'll just show you. But this is just a representation of a movie that I want to use. And then I'm going to change the code that I had here. Instead of sending all of the response back, I'm just going to pick and choose and send only the data that I'm interested in. So I'm going to make a few changes here. Let's cut and paste this code. So instead of this, let me just comment that code out and add the new code. Let's walk through what's going on here. So instead of just showing the HTTP response, I'm going to pass it through JSON. I'm going to get this movie data. Then the next thing I'm going to do is, in here, I'm going to get a JSON representation of all my data. I'm going to create an array. And in this array, I'm going to pass through all of the movies that got returned and create a new movie data. This is then going to just pick up the title and the audience rating. It's going to push it into this array, go through a loop of all of them, and this is what's going to be sent back. So a quick change here. I'm going to go ahead and just deploy this. It gets sent up to the Parse servers, and then once that's done, I'm going to run my same test again. And now I should get a lot less data. So instead, we just see the title. We see the audience rating for all of the different movies. So this is an example of calling an endpoint where I actually did not send any data or any options or parameters. So let's look at another example. In this case, I'm going to be searching for a movie. And Rotten Tomatoes, again, gives me another API that allows me to search for a movie. I just need to pass in a query. And the data that gets returned is very similar to what we had before. So let's look at what's going to be changing here. I'm going to add a different endpoint, a different cloud function for searching movies. And first, let me just drop it in, and then we'll walk through the code. So here's a new function that we're going to create under the next one, movie search. So movie search, here I need a parameter from the user. And I'm going to, my interface is going to say that you're going to pass the parameter in movie. And so I'm going to save that. Here I'm calling a different endpoint from Rotten Tomatoes. And then I'm passing in the movie that I got from the request, the input request into this queue parameter that Rotten Tomatoes expect. Everything else should look very similar to you. Again, as I get the data in, I just pass it in so that I only get the movie title and the audience rating. Go ahead and save that and run this. First deploy it. And because it's a different endpoint, I'm going to run a different curl command. So let's go grab that code. So here's a movie search. And when I run this movie search, I passed in a parameter here. Before, when I was just getting upcoming listing, there was no parameters. So here I'm searching for Star Trek. I get my title, Star Trek, audience rating 89. I got Into Darkness, 91. It's going up. That was a great movie. So this is how you could actually test your code, run it, deploy it, and then you're like, OK, I'm happy with it. Now I want to put it inside of my app. What does this look like? So let's go ahead and see what this looks like inside of Xcode first. Now, running this inside of Xcode is actually pretty straightforward. I had actually grabbed the starter app that Parse makes available. So the only thing that's different from this app is I've added the keys that I need inside of my app delegate. And then inside of the view did load, I'm basically running the command to call the cloud function. And then let's just walk through what's going on here. So pfCloud is the class that you would use. It's got some static methods, call function in background so that it runs in the background thread and doesn't block the UI. You pass in the cloud function name that you created, movie upcoming list. And remember, this is the first example. And with parameters, in this case, we're just getting a list of the upcoming movies. We don't need any parameters. Then in the block, in the handler block, you can pass in and process the result. All we're doing here is we're just sending the output and it's logging it to the console. So that's all we're doing. Let's go ahead and build it and run this. And nothing else is interesting about it. This is the starter app, so this is what you would get. Here, you see the same information that you got from the upcoming list. These are the movies that are upcoming shortly. Let's go ahead and see what this looks like if you're doing a search and you're passing in parameters. So we're just going to comment that one out and uncomment this piece here. The only difference between this call and the previous call, well, there's two differences. One, I'm calling a different cloud function. And then I'm passing in an NS dictionary of my search query. In this case, I'm searching for Star Wars. So go ahead and run this. Very easy to set up. run this, and you see your results. Again, Star Wars, Revenge of the Sith, 8063. Oh, well. But this is how you'd run your result and run your queries. Very easy to do. And now let's see what it looks like on Android. So I'm going to bring out Eclipse. And Eclipse, again, I went and grabbed the starter project that Parse makes available. And then in the onCreate method, I'm calling my function. In this case, Parse Cloud class, call function in background, same reason. You want to have it in the background, don't block the UI thread. And then the endpoint name. And in this case, for the parameters, it's just a hash map. And this is where your parameters would be. It's empty because we don't have anything for the movie's upcoming list. There's no need for parameters. And in here, you just implement the done method, and this is where you can process your results. And in my case, all I'm doing is I am logging the output. So I'm going to go ahead and build it. It's actually building and running on my phone here. There's nothing interesting going on here. But inside of my logcat, this is where all my results are going to show up. I don't know if it's easy to see or not, but let's see. So inside of here, let's get the command running. Yeah, sometimes Eclipse just, I might have to restart it to get it to run to work. But the idea is the same. So you've got call function in background, and if you wanted to actually run it inside of, with some parameters to pass in, the only difference here is you would just uncomment this line here. And in this case, you create a new hash map for the parameters. Movie, Batman, that would be like your search query. You just add another entry into the hash parameters, and that's how you would actually get your results here. So you see that it's very easy to build a cloud function. First of all, you test it. And then after you test it, then you can test it out and run it on your mobile app. And if you're creating your own mobile app, we've just showed you a very simple case where we log the output. But in general, what you would do is then just take that data and probably plug it into your UI or however you want to use it. So let's go back to our slide presentation. So we showed you how you can create these sort of custom cloud functions. And these echo some of the use cases that we talked about. But let's look at other cloud functions. So when we talked about earlier, we talked about setting cloud functions that may be triggered before an object is saved. For example, if you wanted to validate some information. So here's an example that I want to show you. These are sort of some pre-built or cloud functions that can be triggered when an event happens. And this is what we call a before save kind of trigger or cloud function. So what's going on here? So you've got parse cloud before save, and then you've got a review object. So what this says is before a review object, and this is an object that I may have in my app, I want you to do something. So in this case, what it's saying is that I'm about to save a review object. There is a request incoming. What do I want to do? First, I want to get at the comment. So request.object get comment. That's going to get at the comment field that's being changed. And you're checking here, is the comment field greater than 140? This is the use case where you want to limit what data you save. If it is greater than 140, you're going to truncate it. And that way, perhaps you're going to be displaying in your UI, and you only want to see a certain field. And if it is, then you say, cool, you've truncated it, and then you respond, response.success. So this is an example of modifying an object before you save it. But it could be in the same vein that you may want to validate an object before you save it. For example, you could be really hardcore. If anything is over 140 characters, I don't even want to save the whole review object. So how would you change this? How would you change this code if you wanted to modify code? So just want to take suggestions from a crowd. How would you change this code to perhaps maybe not save it if it's greater than 140 characters? You can shout out your answers if you know. Go ahead. Response.fail? Yeah, cool. So response.fail, it's actually called response.error. And for answering that, you got a cupcake, come see me after the show, and a cardiologist will get you hooked up. So this is what it actually looks like. So it's similar to how it starts. Before save review, you're getting the comments. If it's greater than 140 characters, response.error. Response.error, your comment should be greater than 140 characters. In this case, you send an error back. You're not even going to save the object at all. Otherwise, all clear, response.success. And that's how you could actually do validation in your object. Now, we've talked about what you may do before an object is saved. What about after an object is saved? We previously mentioned a use case where perhaps you want to increment the reviews for a movie when a review is added. So this is what it may look like. After save is the function, the cloud function that you could trigger. Review is the name of the object. So the review is being added. You want to increment a counter on the movie object. The deal here is the review has a pointer back to the movie. So the first thing you do is you're doing a query on the movie. You want to see what movie is associated with that review so that you can increment that counter. So you do a new parse query on the movie object, and then you get the request from the parameter that's passed in. So the review is going to have an ID or a pointer back to the movie. All right? So then if you actually get the movie, query.get request movie, then if there's a successful query and you've got the movie object, then you incremented the reviews count. So the movie has an object, which is the number of reviews. You're going to increment that and save. And then once that's done, if there's an error, we're throwing an error here, but the key here is if there's an error, it's not going to prevent the save from happening, but you can go ahead and look at your log files and see if anything went wrong. So we've recently introduced before delete and after delete cloud functions. And these are very similar to before save and after save, except they act when an object is deleted. So these have been recently introduced. If you have used Parse before, you would like to know this. So let's kind of shift gears a bit. So Cloud Code supports the use of JavaScript modules to split up your code. And it's been developed in the spirit of CommonJS. So why would you want to split up your code? Well, you know, good programs like cleaning up, like refactoring, and you like organizing your code. And I'm assuming that I'm standing in front of great programmers here. So I want you to know that modules are a really good way to clean up your code and, you know, allow you to expose functions that can be reused across your code base. So let's go ahead and see how you would do this. So earlier, I showed you a cloud function which would get the average reviews. So let's see how we could shift this function and turn this into a module. It's basically a two-step process. The first step is take all of the code that you want to basically refactor up and then move it into another file. So in this example, I've moved it into a file that I've called cloud myfunctions.js. And it needs to be under the cloud directory. So I wrapped it inside of a get average star. So the first line is kind of like the name of my method, and it exports everything else under the code. Everything under the function is similar to what I had before. It's basically just kind of like moving it into a separate file, wrapping it into exports and the name of the method. And this is the first step. The next step is, where did you call this code? Previously, you called it inside of a defined function. And in my example, I had called it inside of the main.js file. So the second thing that you need to change is that you would then go into, and inside of your main.js, previously you had a cloud.define average stars, and all that code was under there. Instead, what you do is, outside of this, you just call var some variable name, and then a require statement, and the require statement should call to the file that you just created. When you run that require statement, then it loads the module that you had created, it executes the code, and it returns this global exports module, which then you can use. So inside of your defined state, inside of your cloud function, you just have myfunction.get average stars and then pass in the same parameters that you had before. And in this way, you can then just use the same get average stars in other places of your code. So this should give you an idea of how you can define functions in your module that contain code refactored from your main.js file. And then you can make your code base nice and clean. So cloud modules also make it easy to integrate with third-party APIs, and this offers services such as emailing, messaging, etc. So you can think of cloud modules as sort of like built-in JavaScript modules that have been made publicly available. And some examples include, say, Mailgun, SendGrid, Mandrill for working with email. You've got Twilio for voice and text messaging. You've got Stripe for processing credit card payments, and Crowdflyer for images. So how would you use this? So first, you will generally go to these third-party websites and register for an account. They ask you to have sort of like a key some token that you can use to make API calls. Next, you want to familiarize yourself with their code base and the APIs that they make available through the cloud module. And once you're ready for that, then you're going to go ahead and code. So you just add a require statement for their cloud module, and then you just start calling the API methods that you need. So you can find additional details on using cloud modules inside of Parse documentation for anything that you need. So we've learned a lot today. So let's quickly recap what we went through. You got an introduction into cloud code and why it expands the universe for your mobile app and just basically build a lot richer apps. And you can work with the Parse JavaScript SDK. We walked through a typical workflow, and you saw a demo of how to build a cloud function. And then we also saw how you could run that same cloud function inside of your iOS or Android app. Next, we delved into some inbuilt cloud functions. We talked about after saves, before saves, and we mentioned before deletes and after deletes. And these are just different ways that you can use in your code. And then we also talked about cloud modules. How can you build your own cloud modules to organize your code and keeping it clean? Or how can you take advantage of some of the built-in cloud modules that are made available? So I highly recommend that you attend Brian's talk. It's in the next room right after this. It's going to go into more details if your interest has been sufficiently piqued. I'm really happy that you took the time to attend this talk and for bearing with me through all the movie references. And I know you're going to love using cloud code, so I really can't wait to see what you build with it. So we have quite a bit of time for some Q&A. So if you have any questions, go ahead and raise your hands, and we've got mic runners who can come to you. Go ahead and answer those.
Can I kick off a background job in after save?
Can you kick off a cron job in after save?
Background.
A background job in an after save function. That's a question, and I see the engineer who developed it saying, nodding his head. So just to repeat what he said it's not very easy right now, but I'm going to work at it to make it a lot easier in the future. If how would they do it now, right? Yeah. Oh, okay. I guess for the benefit of everyone else, within your after save function, you would just actually make an HTTP call to that actual REST endpoint for your background job, and that's the one way that you could do that. Behind you? Oh, where's it?
Could we look at the code for your cloud function, if it's easy to pull it up?
Okay, go ahead.
I noticed that it says return and then the HTTP request.
Was it very early on? Which one?
Yeah, pretty early. Just the code, like the live demo.
Oh, the live demo.
Or the code for your function.
Oh, the live demo that I did?
Yeah. Could we look at the code for just any one of the functions that you had?
Oh, okay. Could you switch to the demo machine?
The cloud. So, yeah, right there it says return parse.cloud.http request. What does that return, or is it necessary to return? Like where it says return right at the top.
Oh, okay. So this is the concept of Parse promises. So promises is sort of like this new JavaScript thing, and for Parse promises, it can return a promise, and it's just a way of it's just another way of not saying like if, then, else, or whatever. It's just a different way of writing the syntax. So parse.cloud.http request returns a promise, and it just kind of gets a little complicated even when I try to think about it, but it's just a Parse promise. So that's
what is my cloud function supposed to return? Does it matter? Or what should I return from my cloud?
So the Parse cloud function doesn't need to, it just needs to eventually do a response.success or a response.error. So what's happening here is this HTTP request is happening asynchronously. And when it does, then So this thing actually fulfills a promise, and when it returns successfully, then this then is executed. So think of it as if this has happened, it's kind of like a callback block in a sense. So then the then gets executed, and finally, the response to success gets printed. So this return is really not for the whole function per se. It's more for the next.
So what would happen if I did not have return there? Like, can I just call HTTP request and
yeah, it's just kind of
ignore the
happening
return then?
asynchronously in the background. So you want to say, when this is done, do something. So it might just return quickly, and then you may not get a response, or the data hasn't come back, because it's kind of like an asynchronous, like a callback.
Okay, so you're saying that the code would just terminate and
Yeah, it's
it
like,
wouldn't wait for the response.
Yeah, you may not wait for that. And if I'm
Thanks.
saying anything wrong, we'll find it, and I'll come and correct myself. Unless
Okay,
Brad
thank
knows.
you.
Yeah.
So if you create multiple modules, is there a way to deploy single modules, or do you have to deploy everything in one shot?
If you create multiple modules, like multiple,
Yes.
you can. I mean, for every module that you create, you could just always require it, or you could put it in one big file.
Right, but if I have multiple files, do I have to deploy all of them together to the Parse Cloud, or I can deploy just one file that I modified?
You can put it all in one file. You don't have to put it in multiple files. But when you call parse deploy, it'll deploy any files that have changed. It ignores certain files, like the hidden files. But parse deploy just finds out what's changed inside of the cloud directory and kind of moves it up in the service. So you don't have to explicitly say, I want this and that and the other.
But if I wanted to, can I?
If you wanted to
Explicitly just
say,
deploy one module that I have modified.
I don't know if you can do just one module.
Okay.
Yeah. There's one there. Okay.
Hi, is there a way to run the cloud code locally, like through a node server or something like that, or do you have to upload?
I think right now you can only run it by deploying it. But that's one of the feature requests that we're hearing about, so we're definitely thinking about it.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah, so to repeat the question, he says he's got one cloud code. Right now, the cloud code is tied to when you set it up to this one app. And my understanding is you say you've got this cloud code and you just want to use it across many different apps, right?
One app.
Yeah.
App, but there's 10 Parse apps with 10 different clouds.
Yeah.
So the cloud code's identical.
Yeah, it's almost like you want to create your own cloud module type of thing.
Yeah, or just get that one call, get it to the 10 different apps.
Yeah,
you kind of literally have to.
because right now you'd have to create parse deploy this app, parse deploy that app. Yeah. But there's a way that you can create cloud modules, but the question is then it becomes public, right? Yeah, that might be something that we might have to kind of talk offline. I don't know the answer, but as far as I know, you can't do that right now unless you create a cloud module that then becomes public. Yeah.
Can we send the push notifications from the after save?
From where? From Office 8?
Yeah, after save.
I don't know the answer to that question, but I'm pretty sure that if you find us afterwards, we can answer that. Yeah. Any other questions? All right, if not, thank you so much for the time, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the day.